In December 1785, a rather unusual royal wedding took place.
Can I have the rings, please?
The groom was the Prince of Wales, George, the heir to the British throne.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
George has just got married to the love of his life, Maria Fitzherbert. She is 6 years older than him, and she has been married twice before. These things needn't be obstacles to true love, though. Yet there is something a bit strange about this ceremony. It's all happening so secretly in Maria's own drawing room. None of his family have turned up. And that chaplain's a bit dodgy. He's got a criminal record for unpaid debt.
My most fervent wish is realized, my darling. You are my wife, the wife of my heart and my soul, and in the eyes of heaven will ever be.
It's a bit sad, because they may be married in the eyes of heaven, but not in the eyes of the law. Legal impediment number 1, the king, the prince's father, hasn't given his permission for the marriage. Legal impediment number 2, Maria is a Catholic.
This could cause a huge constitutional problem. Under the Act of Settlement, the husband of a Catholic could never become king. So George wanted to keep his wedding a secret from the public and the British Parliament. But that was going to be difficult. Soon, members of Parliament were demanding to know if the prince had forfeited his right to the throne. Whig MP Charles James Fox, a close friend of the prince, stood up in Parliament to answer them. Fox said that this rumoured marriage not only could never have happened legally, but in fact had never happened in any way whatsoever, and that to suggest otherwise was a malicious falsehood. George had lied to Fox and told him that the marriage would never happen. And that's because George wasn't just the Prince of Wales, he was also the Prince of Fibs. George's lie helped keep the course of royal history right on track. The wedding was brushed aside as legally invalid. George could still one day be king. And this wouldn't be the only time royal secrets would be covered up in this volatile era.
Mathieu, what's happening in this picture?
This is the portrait of Marie Antoinette with her children, and it's very important because it is a political representation of the new Queen of France, because at first she was considered as a selfish woman. So with this portrait, she decided to be represented as a Queen of France. Mm-hmm. We can see here her eldest daughter, who was born in 1778, and here the first Dauphin on the right, who died just before the Revolution, and here in the middle, the new Dauphin.
Marie Antoinette was also looking for other creative ways to improve her PR.
Marie Antoinette loved children, and she took some orphans at court. She paid for their education.
And she did that partly through sincere feeling, and partly it must have helped her image as a selfish person?
I think both. Both. I think she was very sincere when she paid for these children, and probably she had on her mind the image she had all around the public.
Modern historians are reappraising Marie Antoinette's role in the French Revolution. Increasingly, she's seen as an active participant rather than just a passive victim.
She became much more political than her husband during the revolution, because she understood at that time what really happened, and she took some decision, probably not the good one. Her husband didn't take any decision, so he didn't know what to do, but she became at that time the real Queen of France.
The Queen's critics called her Madame Deficit, and
and said she'd bankrupted France. But this was another myth. The French had built up huge debts during the American War of Independence, when France supported the rebels against the British Crown. The war had ended just 4 years earlier, and France still couldn't balance the books.
France supports the independence war of America, and it costed about 1.5 billion. And the budget of France was about 600 millions a year. So that is to say about 2.5 more than an annual budget of France.
Oh, wow.
So it's very important. And the Americans, after their 1783, they decided not to reimburse the France people.
So we have the revenue of France.
Yes.
We have the clothes of Marie Antoinette.
Yes.
But then we have the cost of the war to help America up here somewhere.
Yes. France did not recover from this deficit. So maybe it explains the revolution.
So it wasn't so much Marie Antoinette's extravagance that bankrupted France. It was France's support for the American War of Independence. Thomas Jefferson neglected to mention that a key cause of the French Revolution was the birth of the United States.
Marie Antoinette was an Austrian princess. For decades, France and Austria had been enemies. But at the age of 14, Marie Antoinette had been married to the French crown prince to forge a political alliance. But her foreignness would always make her unpopular in France, as would her lavish lifestyle.
It is a terrible thing to be bold. I fear it more than anything in the world. Presents!
Marie Antoinette was notorious for her love of shoes and dresses and parties.
Beautiful. A dress with a bow.
Exaggerated, ludicrous accounts of Marie Antoinette's self-indulgence are circulating everywhere. She's become a sort of poster girl for everything that's wrong with a discontented and starving France. In fact, the US ambassador, who's Thomas Jefferson, will come to say this about her. Had there been no queen, there would have been no revolution. Marie Antoinette is supposed to have come up with one of the most famous phrases in history. She addressed her hungry subjects and proclaimed, "Let them eat cake." The words are still taught to almost every school child in the world. They're used to prove the Queen's indifference to her people. But did she really say, "Let them eat cake"?
For a start, the phrase in French is "qu'ils mangent de la brioche," meaning brioche, a kind of an eggy bun. But "let them eat a kind of eggy bun" isn't quite so catchy in translation. But there's a more fundamental cake fib than that. There's absolutely no evidence that Marie Antoinette ever said those words. No documents, no eyewitness reports, no nothing.
The phrase had been reported as coming out of the mouth of a different French queen, the wife of Louis XIV a century earlier.
It wasn't until 50 years after Marie Antoinette's death that the phrase was first written down and ascribed to her. And even then they said it was a rumour that wasn't true.
But politicians and historians around the world were still trying to explain the cause of the revolution. Their narratives needed a royal scapegoat. And by the 20th century, the myth had become a fixture.
This is an American history primer from 1918, and they've put it like this. When at last the court, overwhelmed with debts, had so far crushed the people with taxes that they had no bread to eat, Marie Antoinette cried out, "If they have no bread, let them eat cake." The words have been put into her mouth to show how thoughtless and out of touch she was. But worse than that, They've been used to justify the bloody events that followed. Anne Boleyn arrived at Henry's court fired up with radical ideas. She grew up here at Hever Castle in Kent, the daughter of Lady Elizabeth Howard and an ambitious diplomat, Thomas Boleyn. Thomas secured his younger daughter a coveted position as maid of honour in the French court. And it was there that Anne was introduced to the new ideas that were transforming Europe.
During those years, she came in contact with evangelical Protestants, people who were rethinking old verities, who were coming up with new ways of approaching everything, including faith.
What were these perhaps contentious new religious ideas that Anne was picking up in France?
A key one is the source of authority. So when you're making decisions about religious matters, who do you look to as the authority on that matter? Whether it's the Bible, Scripture, which is what these evangelicals were arguing, or whether you turn to the wisdom of the church. And followers of Luther said that actually the church was flawed, that the Pope was fallible.
Do you think Henry would have taken these ideas about the authority of the Pope to heart if it hadn't been for Anne?
I think Anne's pivotal because we know that Henry hates Luther. Anne obviously had a real hold on his heart and so could introduce ideas to him that other people couldn't possibly say.
And is this something that's been downplayed by the people who see her as just a sex pot?
I think that comes down to pretty misogynistic ways of seeing Henry VIII's wives in the past, actually, and that it's much easier if you can sort of boil them down to being a bit of skirt and not really anything more. And actually, with Anne, we do have something more. She is somebody who makes a massive difference in terms of English history. We could argue that Henry VIII would not have broken with the Roman Catholic Church if it weren't for Anne's influence.
Anne was at court for several years before she turned the king's head. But when she did, Henry became besotted with her. They weren't lovers yet. Instead, in the private moments they had together, Anne took the opportunity to introduce Henry to a radical Protestant book.
The book Anne's showing Henry is called The Obedience of a Christian Man by William Tyndale, the Protestant scholar. Now, this book is controversial. You might even call it seditious. Tyndale's seen as a heretic by the Catholic Church because his book implies that kings have lost their power to the Church. Anne's taken a serious risk smuggling this book out of France and into England, and then she's been bold enough to put it under Henry's nose. She's even marked a special passage for him to read.
Kings, they are but shadows, vain names and things idle, having nothing to do in the world but if our Holy Father needeth their help. This is a book that me and all kings should read.
The little interaction shows Anne beginning to persuade the king that maybe not all radical Protestants are bad, and that maybe breaking with Rome could hold advantages from them both.
Anne was winning Henry round to some Protestant ideas. And she refused to sleep with the king until he'd made her his new queen. But there were many obstacles in her way. Henry was still married, and his wife had many supporters at court.
Eustace Chapuis was devoted to Charles V, who just happened to be the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. Chapuis really loved Catherine of Aragon. It was said that he venerated her like a saint. And partly as a result of this, he really hated Anne Boleyn. In his letters to Charles V, Chapuis describes Anne as more Lutheran than Luther, and he slut-shamed her. He called her the concubine and the whore. And Chapuis really set up this image of Anne that does survive to this day as the wicked, evil seductress, as the original other woman. Anne's genuine intelligence and sense of political strategy just don't fit into this soap opera version of the story.
In 1532, Thomas Cromwell became Henry's chief minister. Unlike Henry, he was a radical Protestant who saw Luther as a progressive force. An ally of Anne Boleyn, he saw the King's Great Matter as an opportunity to advance the Protestant cause. So Cromwell began to weave some expert political propaganda. He assured Henry that there was a way to get him his divorce, improve his finances, and enhance his political power. It would just take 2 Acts of Parliament. The first was drafted in 1533.
This is the real, actual act in restraint of appeals. And because this act banned appealing to the Pope in ecclesiastical matters, it meant that Catherine was now banned from appealing to the Pope in her and Henry's great matter. From this point onwards, it would be Parliament, not the Pope, it would be London, not Rome, that would be the final authority on the constitutional affairs of England.
By this time, Anne had succumbed to Henry's advances. And in January 1533, before the act had even been passed, Anne discovered she was pregnant. To make sure a potential baby boy was legitimate, they quickly got married. Henry, who was still married to Catherine, was now a bigamist. The Pope expelled him from the Catholic Church. This guaranteed that Henry would burn in hell for eternity.
But Henry didn't seem to mind too much, because with Cromwell busy drafting his revolutionary acts, Henry seemed to feel that his powers were limitless.
A year later, Cromwell produced a second bill, the Act of Supremacy. This made Henry the supreme head of a new Church of England and severed all ties with Rome.
But how could he possibly justify this massive break with Rome? Well, the first clue comes in the very first line of the Act in Restraint of Appeals, where we begin to see Cromwell emerging as one of history's biggest fibbers. It says, "By diverse and sundry old authentic histories and chronicles, it's manifestly declared and expressed that this realm of England is an empire, governed by one supreme head and king having the dignity and royal estate of the imperial crown." What he's saying here is that Henry rules an empire. He is an emperor, as kings of England have been for centuries. And emperors are beholden to nobody, certainly not to the Pope. But where did this whole idea of empire come from? Who was Cromwell kidding?
The truth is that Henry had no empire beyond the British Isles, apart from a precarious foothold in Calais that was increasingly expensive to defend from the French. But Cromwell wasn't about to let facts like these get in the way of his master plan. To justify the passage of power from Rome to London, he manipulated English history. This is the 12th century book that Cromwell used as his source and his justification. It's the history of the kings of Britain by a Welsh monk called Geoffrey of Monmouth. And in it, he takes the story of the kings of Britain right back to one of Britain's best-loved legends, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But this is really pseudo-history. It's more like a collection of fairy stories. But these fairy stories were the diverse and sundry old authentic histories and chronicles Cromwell was relying upon for his claim that England really was an empire. In November 1588, Queen Elizabeth I held a procession through London. This was her victory parade. The Queen made her way through the city to St. Paul's to give thanks. God and his chosen special monarch together had saved the day. They were the hero and the heroine at the heart of this narrative. But in reality, though, things weren't quite so heroic. Elizabeth's promise at Tilbury to reward her soldiers proved to be empty rhetoric. The war had drained Elizabeth's coffers. The sailors who fought for England were hit by disease and were still fighting for their wages. The Crown threatened prison for those slanderously suggesting that they hadn't been paid. William Cecil now rubbed salt into the wound. He said, well, if the soldiers die of illness, then at least the Crown won't have to pay them. By the end of 1588, more than half of the men who'd fought in the Armada campaign were dead, and they were killed not by the Spanish, but by disease and starvation. The reality of post-Armada England was economic crisis and an increasingly unpopular queen. It was time for a royal makeover. Elizabeth is now in her 50s, unmarried, and too old to produce the all-important heir to the throne. Her lustrous red locks have gone. Her face is pockmarked. More than ever, Elizabeth must conceal her frailties. Elizabeth has to manufacture an image of eternal youth. She needs to present herself as something more than merely mortal. On goes the white lead makeup to cover up her smallpox scars, and a red wig to cover up her grey hair. This is Elizabeth I as the Virgin Queen. She's married, but only to her country. And this isn't just an image for her courtiers. Everyone in England will see this. It's like a Tudor profile pic. And the handle is Gloriana. What we're seeing here is the creation of an Elizabethan marketing campaign. Elizabeth had lots of different portraits of herself commissioned, and they were sent out across England, across Europe, and all of them were loaded with propaganda messages. They said that Queen Elizabeth I is pure, that she's powerful, that she's going to make England great again. The Queen, who's been remembered as a feeble puppet, was in fact now ready to dismiss her lifelong friend. Sarah resorted to blackmail. To back up the rumours about Anne's sexuality, she said she'd publish intimate letters the Queen had sent her over the years. So what is the truth about Anne's sexuality? These letters are often taken as so-called evidence that Queen Anne was our lesbian queen. What's your take on the letters as support for that or not?
Well, I mean, the letters obviously don't contain anything that explicit about some carnal relationship. So I think the only thing we do know that for which there is evidence in the letters is the emotional intensity of their relationship, especially on Anne's part.
Sarah said that Anne's letters were sometimes full of flames of extravagant passion. What sort of thing was she referring to?
She was referring to letters like this one. I have been in expectation of you a long time, but can stay no longer without desiring to know what you intend to do with me, for it is most certain I can't go to bed without seeing you. Could you see my heart, you would find I have not one thought but what I ought to have, the dear woman who my soul loves.
The dear woman who my soul loves.
Mm-hmm.
Such a special feeling to read such an intimate letter.
Yeah.
I truly feel that if you were a royal woman as well, you would be married off at a young age to an arranged match that was all about producing the kids, really. So you would naturally seek emotional fulfillment, wouldn't you?
I mean, Anne did, I think, she did really love her husband. There's certainly no correspondence like this between her and George. I mean, the suggestion that there is something unnatural about Anne's feelings for other women really originates from Sarah herself. So here we have Sarah writing to Anne about Anne having no inclination for any but of one's own sex.
So the evidence for Anne being what we might call gay is shaky. But after Sarah's threat of blackmail, the relationship between the once close friends broke down completely.
Sarah knows she's gone too far and she tries to patch things up. But for Anne, too little, too late.
You are my friend and my queen.
Whatever you have to say, you may put in writing.
But why have you forsaken me for her?
You said you desired no answer, and I will give you none.
If I tormented you, or did not behave with decency,
Whatever you have to say, you may put in writing.
but dearest Anne, why?
You said you desired no answer, and I will give you none.
The Queen's best friend forever has just been defriended.
Officially, it was the local Soviets' decision to execute the royal family, not Lenin's. But Helen Rappaport is sceptical. Helen, what's the evidence that Lenin was involved in this decision to kill the Romanovs?
It's very difficult to actually really confirm it in terms of hard physical paper evidence, because the whole objective of Soviet historiographers ever since was to protect Lenin's reputation and make out that he was always a good guy of the revolution. He wouldn't murder little children, would he? But Lenin certainly was a control freak. He was in charge. In this telegram sent on the 16th, the word comes from Ekaterinburg to Lenin: tell him we can't wait any longer, the city's going to fall. We need to go ahead with the Sud, which was the sentence that they had agreed previously in Moscow, that the family should be murdered because the city was going to fall. And it says, if you don't agree with us going ahead with it, let us know quickly, pretty much. So that was telling Moscow that they were going to go ahead, and effectively they did that night, the 16th.
It's quite clever. The telegram doesn't say, we're going to kill them.
No,
it says,
no.
we're going to do what
we
agreed earlier.
Yeah.
Having executed Nicholas, as well as his wife and children, the Bolsheviks might have eliminated one problem, but they've created a brand new one as well. Murdering a royal mother and her children was going to provoke international condemnation of the new communist regime. And here comes one of the biggest lies of the whole revolution. This press release will be picked up by newspapers all around the world. And it says, the ex-Tsar has been shot on the orders of the local Soviet, and that Nicholas Romanov's wife and son have been taken to a secure place. Now that's not true, and it's chilling. The bodies of the Romanovs were buried in a nearby forest. The lies told about the royal family led to a lingering belief that the youngest daughter, Anastasia, had somehow survived. If the princess were alive, then she'd become the last hope for a restoration of the Romanov dynasty. The true fate of Anastasia would remain a mystery for decades.